2/3 of those people who were unhappy 5 years earlier, who stayed married, were either, this was a 7-point scale, 7 being fabulous, were either a 6 or a 7.
People with one partner are much happier with their partner sexually and emotionally than are individuals who have many partners. Correlational evidence, as the associations, are striking.
It may be too late, for although economists and social scientists tell us that this is not a political issue, it remains perhaps the most highly politically incorrect one.
There's a dispute, I think, between people who are making moral claims about family, divorce, cohabitation, gay marriage, all sorts of that. There's a dispute between people who are making moral claims about this and people who are making data-based claims.
And when you look at textbooks, when you look at what scholars and academic people who are not doing the research say about this issue, there's a very big disconnect there.
Those of us who are interested in data-based claims and are trying to steer clear of making clear moral claims about this, we're largely in agreement about the troubling waters that we're about to boat into.
A lot of the textbooks generally are not reporting very much of the evidence that's being accumulated by the researchers.
It's also true, I think, for people who are worried about women's rights, about the gay rights, about environmentalism. All of these movements are deeply informed by a 1970s era preoccupation with the so-called population bomb.
People who are out there teaching, primarily in smaller colleges and universities, they really don't want to go into their classes and talk about how differences in family form make a difference in terms of child outcomes.
If suddenly we live in a world in which people understand that the future is one of depopulation, then all of those progressive causes will have to find a new way of arguing.
Interest groups that support families are very marginal in the political competition. There's a good reason for this, I think, and that is that families are units that are looking after children. They're usually pretty busy, and they don't have the time or the inclination to compete on the political stage.
This was a subcommittee of the Senate, as I recall, maybe 8 or 9, 10 years ago, and at that time many of us were calling attention to the fact that marriage was a seriously weakening institution in the United States. We were hoping that they might take some kind of action.
Politicians will be bombarded by all sorts of groups. The temptation to forget that there are families out there and that the state and society in large has a role in supporting and protecting the family, that's what is likely to get lost.
I don't think anything came out of that, to tell you the truth.
I have to admit that we started to pay serious attention to our family policy after we admitted that we are facing the demographic catastrophe. The number of the young children are becoming less and less. And for such a small nation as Latvia, it might even endanger the survival of our nation. So it's very crucial for us to change the demographic situation. And we, as the policymakers, think that the best way to improve the demographic situation is by strengthening the families.
Well, one of the tricky things about this question is if people are not having enough children as a whole to replace the population, does that imply eventual human extinction? And I think the answer actually is no, because there are children still being born. It's just that they're disproportionately being born to people of faith. That's true whether we're talking about Orthodox Jews or fundamentalist Christians, fundamentalist Muslims. Around the world, people of the book tend to have larger families than their secular counterparts.
The evolutionary biology of sex is all about reproduction, which is sort of a mystery to me. If in fact we are hardwired to reproduce, why are so many people not interested in reproducing?
For those of us who were raised to believe in the teachings of Thomas Malthus or Charles Darwin, for example, these trends are very hard to absorb.
I mean, the most intelligent people in the world are not interested in reproducing.
Darwinism, for example, presumes that organisms always breed up to the limits of their resources. And this is what causes the competition and survival of the fittest under the theory. And yet here we look and you see there's one great big species that stands as an exception to this, apparently, and that one species would be human beings.
They stake a lot on the idea that men are interested in reproducing themselves as much as possible, and men are interested in sex. None of us doubt that, but are they really interested in reproducing themselves? Have they always been interested in that? I don't know. A lot of that's speculation.
The only way you can sort of preserve the theory is to say, well, human beings are on the road to extinction. They're maladapted to their environment. Or you can say, as I just said previously, that certain kinds of human beings are on the way to extinction. In particular, people who, for lack of faith, don't go forth and multiply. We find ourselves at a crossroads. There's one way to turn this around, maybe, I'd call the Swedish model. That's one way. The other way is a return to traditional values, and specifically patriarchy, properly understood, which was a value system